So, as usual, I guess that's my trademark is the beginning of the video trying to get this camera phone set up. I think everything is in placement, looks good for the most part. We do have a little bit of shadow. All right, so I am itching to paint. I'm gonna get this paper wet, this quarter sheet of Stonehenge Aqua, and then I'll talk about what is on my mind while this stretches out. So I use a medium size Ron Ranson Hake brush, and you can find that online. There's also a Facebook group dedicated to fast and loose painting style and utilizing the Hake brush. That's Ron Ranson Disciples. So if you're a painter interested in this style, want to see what other people are doing with it, whether you're good, bad, beginner, or professional, check it out. It's a really great community. Just the other day, I realized that that's been like the longest running Facebook page I've ever been active in. That's been for like a year and a half now I've been active with it. So it's a really good group of people. And it's, just fun. Anyway, let's see. So with today, I'm going to play with my palette and get it set up. I was thinking that I'd do a basic wet and wet. So I'm not really too concerned about the initial stages, rather than having kind of a background, a stage set for my foreground. So I was thinking about setting that up, drying it off, letting it soften and whatnot. Then, and this had occurred to me when I was leaving my friend's house earlier, I was pulling out of the driveway. It was, let's say, 6 o'clock. So it was already dark down here. We're in winter time. And there was a line of trees that I usually paint or do paintings of from memory. And I was just looking at it as I was pulling out. And, being close to that tree, the trees, I saw a little bit more detail in the trees and whatnot. And I guess I was thinking of Chinese painting when I had seen that, where seeing, and I'm not good with the words or the pronunciation of the parts of a tree, but like the knots and the whorls and the I think it's the bowls of the tree, and it had me thinking. I have a fast and loose strokes and feeding paint into different areas to get those type of effects. So I thought, put in an initial background, dry it, then do a wetting of the shape, but not entirely. So there's places that'd be wet and places that would be dry. And then feeding colors in and seeing how that affects, and almost, a portrait of a tree in that style. So I really haven't done a tree portrait in a long time. I posted one on the Etsy account where it was a lot of splashing and a lot of movement, and that was for my mind. Prior to that, I did some oil paintings with trees being in the focus, but those were, I think, imaginary from my mind as well. In college, I did do a few drawings and studies of trees and whatnot, so I'm not completely versed in tree portraits, and this might be something where I'd benefit from a picture, but imagination and thought is going to have to rule the day, unfortunately, with this one. So I'm really not too concerned with this background. I just put in alizarin and then some raw sienna, and then we'll put in some ultramarine. We could even just grab some lemon yellow. I dropped some Payne's gray off of the tube when I had opened it. I'm not sure why it's so hard right there. I guess it was scratched the paper. In the future, with something like this, what would be beneficial would be sketches so that you could plan out where the shadow would be. For instance, and I'm just mixing a Payne's gray with burnt sienna. You can put the shadow right here for the tree and let that diffuse, and then later on kind of touch up with it more. And put stuff in the background. I'm reluctant to really do much more with this due to the fact that I really want to focus on that tree. So let's say it like that and we'll just dry it off, okay? So if you have headphones on, it's about to get noisy. All right, looks like we're almost there with dry. If you're gonna dry it on a high setting, when it was that wet and wet, you'll start having that pushing of the water and the pigment. So just be aware of that. I lifted my my dryer up pretty high, so I would have more of a dispersion of the heat in the air as opposed to pushing so much to the side. Anywho, must have dripped something on the paper right there, so you see a little bit of marks. So I'm not sure what that was. Let's see. I do want to put a little bit of a background in, just because with the intensity of the tree that I want to put in, I don't think I have the the skill to really go and fit these into those places, or at least the way I want. So we'll do a horizon line, just a simple left to right. Feed a little bit of color into that, just have a little bit of fun. Feed a little bit of Payne's gray in the bottom. Maybe mix a little green. Get a little bit of, no, I want some more green than that, because this is lemon yellow. This is just kind of a dry brush. Now, we'll decide where we really want this tree. It is really just going to be the main focus of this painting. This is just Payne's Gray, just throwing straight in. Let me, I have 2 cups of water. I don't usually do that, but I've been leaning more towards that so I can, you know, I don't wash my brush that often, but when I do, it gets it quite muddy. This is some raw sienna. Just a little bit of variety down here. I'm going to play around with it a little bit more. Okay, so let's dry this off and then we'll come up with a plan. That's dry enough. Now, here is where the true experiment is going to lie within this painting. And this was the sporadic wet and wet for where the tree's trunk and whatnot is going to be. As well as, yeah, to get the diffusion, the sharp and the hard edges. I grabbed a round brush, so this is a large round. But when I had started out with watercolors, I had used these Chinese brushes, and something like this. I really don't remember the composition of these brushes, but this was for more wet and dry brush effects in the same motion. But I don't want to utilize it because I don't know how many y'all would have that readily on hand. I think you would have a round brush or a Hake brush. So we could use either one. And I'm thinking we'll essentially put the shape of this tree in. And it's going to be a big tree. It's going to really focus on it like a big old gnarled oak. And we're going to wind up having foliage and whatnot. But there we go. So you can probably see just the wet areas of this. Now I want to mix. When I say want to, as if I'm following a recipe, I'm not sure. Because when I had done, the closest thing that I'm referring to is the Chinese watercolor painting, where you would take ink, maybe mixed with a little bit of water, on one of those brushes that I'd shown you, and you would go sideways, and it'd be a one-stroke type deal on a paper that wasn't sized, so it would disperse and whatnot. So I'm mixing burnt umber and Payne's Gray, just get dark, and let's feed it in and get textures. And this is happening over the wet that I had put in. Here there's no wet, and this is more of the Chinese approach to the mat. I'll just have stuff come off, and I'm going to leave gaps for foliage. Bring its shadow over. I'm going to grab some raw sienna while this is wet and feed a variety of colors into this. In the Chinese style, you would leave that white, but there wouldn't really be that much of a background. And this is referring to the Chinese Pronunciation, let's say it's a Zieu, I believe, which was kind of, I think, meant word or spoken word, where it was just done, as opposed to, I think it was Gongbi, which was meticulous painting for the Chinese. And we are students of the fast and loose style. Both beautiful in their own right. Meticulous paintings, the excessive amount of talent and time and delicacy that somebody has, while fast and loose is more the emotion and the spontaneity and allowing happy accidents to take place. I am just scraping in and allowing just random textures to occur. So I let that wet and wet. I don't know how successful that was. You'll have to tell me with that as you watch the video. And here I just have the card and I'm going back and forth, putting in darks and scraping textures out. So we have the basis for our tree. I do feel like we used up a lot of the water. I don't know if the brush was absorbing it or what, but we could re-wet in spots and feed in if need be. We could, I mean, now that we have the round all wet, meaning that we have to wash it most likely, we can throw a little bit on that and feed stuff in as well. It's just, you can have fun with like calligraphy type strokes. Imagine it's the end of the rigger brush. Okay, so if you don't have one of these, you can use the rigger. So you could have wet with the hake, and then you could have came back in and scraped. And use, yes, with the hake, use that, and then come back in with this guy. I lost my train of thought, sorry. You could add, from what the Japanese woodcuts were what inspired a lot of our expressionist painters, I believe, like Van Gogh and whatnot. They were looking at a lot of those. And, you know, his drawings and his paintings, you see those type of calligraphy drawings and marks. Oddly enough, when the Chinese use their brushes, or at least for writing, I believe it was a very vertical, straight up and down, just like this. I'm not an expert at all in Chinese culture. That's as much as I could probably tell you. So let's once again add a little texture, have fun. Think of the roundness of a tree trunk, but don't treat it like a bottle. There's something gross in that bottle. This was my gum Arabic that I'd put to mix. I'm gonna have to wash that out. I put it on the side. But yeah, anyway, don't think of it as a round bottle, but you want to think of the concept of the roundness that's taking place, where you have that curvature, the strongest point. So here's the light catching the edges. You could think about it with the trunks as well. And the branches. And think about this part being darker and closer to you. But Don't make it perfectly cylindrical tubes. Have the organic shape to it. Have the dips and the rises and the bumps and the knots and the knurls and the whirls. Paint a tree Dr. Seuss would be proud of. This is a weird video, isn't it? It's been a long day. So this is taking the hake because we need to put some foliage in. I'm kind of starting with darker. This is more the Payne's gray. This is the bottom portion of the foliage. The foliage is going to be behind the trees and spots, and that's going to add interest to it. And this is an area where you can explore counter change, where we could try to lighten that up and pull pigment away to lighten that. You also want to explore density and just a lack of it. Where we have it here and here, let's leave a gap and have there. Let's have it here, leave a gap in other spots. Now I'm pushing this brush and whatever pigment is on it to the limits at this point. So we'll switch things up. In this, I could scrape out branches and break up that shape that I put in. I could also come in with the rigger and do that as well. I could come with the round and do that. We just want to have fun. We want to be loose and we want to experiment. So let's take our rigger, start putting a little bit of those thoughts in there, and then we'll feed other colors in. Take a lighter wash to simulate trees that are extending away from us, where the more pigmented is coming closer. So that's receding into the picture. So I'm trying to get a 3D effect with it. And let the branch interact with the other branches, going behind or looping in front. Let's grab a little bit of water on the brush and get some raw sienna on this. Now, I may have to go to sap green and to get the variety in there, but this will give us a little bit of closer foliage. We're also going to have foliage come up, grass and whatnot. Let's let this happen. This is the raw sienna. Let's see if we get a branch seem to come closer to us. One that went back. Let's see if we get one that comes closer. You might have to feed in a little bit of Payne's gray in there too. Okay, let's see, what else do we want to do with this? Now, we'll fall back on some sap green. I'll pour out some fresh sap green. I'll use it almost straight from the tube. Okay, so this is the sap green. So the sap green, having the yellow aspect to it, is pushing it closer to us. So the idea is building up layers, something that's far away, something that's closer. Though we do fall into the crutch of green being summery. So I think tonal variety would be a necessity. Well, tonal variety is very important, but for a wintertime painting where you're losing a lot of the foliage. I'm going to come into this and feed in a little bit of Payne's Gray to darken it. I got to make sure I stay sporadic with my patterns. I may do a little bit of scraping. I'm just thinking how dark this spot at the base of the tree would be. So I don't like that flat, completely flat area, so that's why I'm coming up with the scrapes in that right there. Oh, good news. I don't know if I mentioned, I talk about like donating art to charities and whatnot. My coworkers / friends are on the board for the local theater guild, which was a nonprofit, and they had one of their local yearly fundraisers. And I gave them 3 watercolors to auction off, and it raised $160 for them. So I'm really excited about that. Last year, the painting that I gave them raised, and I'm totally bragging right now. Last year, the painting that I gave them raised $100. So this year, I gave them 3. It raised a total of $160. So next year, I'm gonna have to beat that goal for myself. And I did last weekend my oil that I'm donating to the Rotary Club for their charity auction, and then I'm gonna get together some other stuff for them as well. And I got to beat my goal for them. So, but I'm pretty excited about that. And that theater guild and that building has been around for a really long time. It's, I think, protected by the Historical Society. Like, it's considered a historical building. And they're starting to renovate it and take care of it and fix up what needs to be done. So that's really cool. They're doing the right thing. Hopefully next year I can eventually go to these things and meet the people and whatnot. I usually I'll do a farmer's market and somebody say, oh, I won your painting from that charity event and whatnot, which is like really cool. But I would like to meet those people in person when they're in the process of it. So I'm just kind of playing around down here for a little bit, just building up the base of this tree, thinking about what I want to do in the tree itself, kind of letting it hang out for a little bit. think to yourself, where would the dark catch? Utilize different textural effects. Like right there, I was using this side of the brush. I can use that for stuff hanging off the branches as well. This is just mixtures of darks and browns. And we're kind of layering things where, and I mentioned that earlier, where we're working kind of back forward. So if you remember, this little guy back there, was put as a receding branch. And now we're doing stuff on top of it. And I'm kind of breaking it up some, letting things pass in front of others, letting them loop behind themselves. And this is where you could kind of really just let yourself get lost and just have fun. And I think it's still considered fast and loose at this point because we're not following an image. And even if we were, we're just going with the flow and just putting calligraphy strokes in. And the only danger we have is just overworking it. And the question is, and I don't have an answer to it, is when do you stop? At what point? So let's mix burnt with the sap green. We'll put some more. So we're going to have foliage in front and behind, and that's what you want to keep in mind, is where is it going to get blocked out by what's in front? Where is it going to be behind? And then you do run the risk of also turning it into a very dark blob, And that's where experimenting practice takes place. I mean, the videos are personally helpful, where in something like this I can look and say, okay, this is where I should have stopped or could have stopped. Let me stand up and take a look. Let's move towards our finishing part, but I'm going to take that Payne's Gray into this mixture and kind of really put along that edge so we could kind of do a framing device almost, where we still feel like we're looking up into the trees. So the darker looks like we have an overhang above us. Let's put that there. Get a little bit of scrapes. This is just taking that dark, and then we'll dry it off, we'll sign it, we'll put the matte over it, see how things came out. Let's get some burnt umber. Let some of these guys sit a little bit forward, warm them up a little bit. could dot up it as if there's so like as if we have the ivy coming up, but I'm not sure how well that will show up on here. The let's see, ivy growing up amongst this. Yeah, let's try it off and we'll call it at that. So I'll dry it off. I'll say my ending comments. We'll take a look at it. Okay. Alright, so this came out very dark. Very, very dark. It's been a while since I let it push that far. And it's something that I personally enjoy, but I know some people are not a fan of it. It's just, I think from just the build-up of the earth tones and the Payne's gray and using things so concentrated. Anyway, so that's the first thing. So this is definitely a departure from what I've been showing y'all recently in regards to the atmospheric type effects of the earth tones in the palette. Second, I think that our wetting the paper for the tree path, and it was kind of a imaginary tree where we're just letting it grow, was fun, and it helped with the spontaneity of it. How much of that spontaneity shows through at the end, I'm not quite sure. Orientation, I went landscape with it. I don't want to make you all dizzy by holding it, so I'm just going to lift it up on an angle. Orientation, I went landscape. It would have been kind of interesting to go portrait with it. What else? I was talking about the opportunity to do some counter change, which this was accidental. The light of the trunk right here against the dark of the foliage, but that's a great opportunity to experiment and show changes in interest throughout a painting. So that's something that you want to experiment with it as well. So down below I have a whole bunch of links for you to check out. The Etsy account if you are interested in any of my paintings. Also have the Patreon account if you're interested in following on there. I'm trying to post some exclusive content. Also just a lot of different things. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Feel free to follow along, post your results, and let me know what you think. All right, enjoy.